welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's discussion on building a culture of philanthropy. My name is Derval Costello. I'm Managing Director of CCS and oversee our work in Europe, where we're currently supporting 7 schools across the continent. I wanted to just outline the agenda for today and maybe some of the housekeeping. So we very much want today to be a lively conversation. So throughout the whole session, please use the chat box. If you want to raise your virtual hand, Laura, who I'll introduce the whole panel in a moment. Laura will take your questions. Or certainly Ben and I are going to start with a casual conversation. And by all means, if you want to hold your questions till the end of that as well, whichever your preference is. In mentioning Ben Weinberg, Headmaster of American School of Madrid. Ben, we're so thrilled to have you with us today and very grateful. We go back a long way with Ben and ASM, and we'll talk in a few moments, Ben, about your tremendous success, but you've been at ASM for over 10 years now, most time of which being serving as Headmaster, and of course, in these last couple of years, donning that very important fundraising hat. So we're delighted to have you. From a CCS perspective, let me just introduce my colleagues. Charlie, who is now based in New York, had spent over 13 years in Europe. And today, fair to say, Charlie, you work across all 5 continents, including many schools from the Abu Dhabi all the way to the UK to Spain and beyond. Then Laura, while currently in the New York, is moving back to Paris in the summertime. And while you were in Paris in the past, Laura, not alone working with us, but also to spend time serving as Advancement Director for American School of Paris. And then last but not least, Sam, who will help if you have any technical difficulties, whether it's trying to ask a question or raise your hand. If you feed them through Sam, she'll be able to help you. Sam, you may just go on. And of course, a special welcome to all of you. And we have a firm, it must be 15, 16 years ago, started this series called Perspectives on Philanthropies. And over that span of 15, 16 years, we have interacted right across the not-for-profit sector. Today, obviously, is focused on schools. But in looking back through the records over that period, we have interacted with 1,200 not-for-profit colleagues, many of you on the call today, that have sat in on some of these sessions, whether virtual or in person. And today then we have 17 countries represented across 3 continents, and all kinds of schools at understanding our emphasis on international, but certainly all kinds of schools at varying stages of fundraising, readiness, success, maturity, and everything in between. So we are very pleased that you can join us, and we hope that regardless of your fundraising starting point, that no pressure, Ben, but that today everybody will go away with some valuable advice and hopefully some practical tips as well. I had touched a little bit on Ben's period or tenure at ASM, but I'm sure a number of you know ASM's tremendous reputation. Has been around. Ben, you had huge celebrations recently in marking the 60th anniversary of the school, and certainly in a very healthy position, and arguably maybe even more so now with your recent fundraising campaign. And certainly some may have called you crazy, Ben, to start a campaign in the midst of the pandemic, but it has paid off and certainly established a culture of philanthropy that is now slowly and surely being embedded within the school. And I'm sure you can pick up on some of those comments as we go through our conversation.
Sure.
Ben, perhaps we'll start that now, and as many would expect, perhaps we'll go right back to the beginning from a fundraising perspective. And before you start the campaign in ASM, you might just give everyone a flavour of what kind of fundraising, if any, was underway at the school.
So when I started here, there'd been episodic fundraising events that largely didn't pan out in any kind of big or real or meaningful way. They raised awareness for things the school was doing, the Center for the Arts, some other things, but there was nothing systemic, nothing sustained, nothing comprehensive in terms of it. They were all centered around individual facilities rather than the idea of creating a culture of philanthropy or a culture of giving. And they were shorter term horizons rather than something that we were going to build the systems and structures for.
Great. I want to ask what were your genuine feelings when you started the fundraising? I can remember some of your words, but I'll allow you to share your own experience.
Well, I remember when I was interviewed for the position, the board of trustees was there with a consultant, and they said, well, of course, we don't expect you to have any fundraising experience. You know, you have obviously not done anything. And they sort of painted their own picture of themselves of having been successful. So when I found out that this was going to be something that we were going to engage in more seriously, it was a sort of deer in the headlights moment for sure. In the sense of asking for money is not something easy to do. Certainly for me, I had no, besides going to the bank and asking for a commercial fishing loan, there hadn't been a lot of experience trying to solicit funds, a little bit of grant writing in a rural school in Maine, but that was all removed and much less personal. And so this was going to launch me directly into the face of the community in the sense of, you're already paying the fees, but there's a case to be made for giving us beyond the fees. And that was something that I did not feel prepared for at all.
So I have a few questions coming out of that. Maybe before we get to how did you prepare, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but you've used the word skeptical with me in the past. So I'd be curious about that. And then how did your mindset change and how did you prepare? There are a few questions in there.
Yeah, so I'll do the skeptical one first. Probably skeptical on a personal level, like, sort of doubting whether I'd be able to live up to the expectations and step into that role and play that part. And also the sort of skeptic of what was shared by the board and some other people. It's, fine to raise funds in a tax system that supports philanthropy. It's fine to do that within a culture in which philanthropy is seen as a given almost, but in the thing the board always came back to was, yes, that works. It works in the US, but this is Spain. Spanish tax laws are different. The culture is different. The families feel, many of them, that the fees are high enough already, all kinds. So there was a practical skepticism and a personal skepticism. And then the second part was about preparing then. So it's a bit like learning how to swim. You can have somebody demonstrate strokes, and you could practice in the air all you want, but until you jump in the pool and actually have to do it, it's not going to really matter what all the theory of swimming in. It's the actual doing of it. And so we had done work with CCS, with Evelyn and with yourself, in terms of understanding what a conversation could go like, of understanding what the background was, of who we were talking to. We had helped develop the materials that articulated and began to tell in a more cohesive and comprehensive way the ASM story, sort of where we've been, where we're going, and what do we want to be. And so armed with that a growing sense of who we were, a sense of there's at least a script, which in the first few times I carefully transcribed from the text on the PDF onto my own notes, and then did that several times so I could remember it enough to be able to deliver it somewhat. But that was a script. And it wasn't until the script began to become our own and the story became our own to tell that we could actually live that. And at that point, we were not just, floating in the water doing the doggy paddle, to keep that metaphor going, but that we were actually able to swim.
Ben, I want to pick you up on a word you've used a couple of times, story. And again, I've heard you in the past say that fundraising isn't about selling, it's about storytelling. Could you elaborate a little on that? Yeah,
well, that was sort of lucky for me, because the storytelling is something that I do feel comfortable doing. I grew up with it on the coast of Maine with fishermen. I mean, there were all kinds of stories to be told, and sort of the remembrance of things and the shaping of history by the telling of stories. And so the idea of selling was something that felt really foreign to me and difficult. But the storytelling, and then making that storytelling relevant and in the moment to, we've been doing a lot of one-on-one conversations at this point. We haven't started doing the group conversations and the sort of larger storytelling, but making that story relevant and meaningful and alive to the people sitting at the table to you, across from you, being able to give a tour of the school that was sort of going to highlight, sometimes by happy accident and sometimes by grand design. If we could do we started by accident doing a tour of the school and then going through the technology area where robotics and those classes are going on. So we wanted to start to talk about the role of play in learning, particularly in early childhood, and then helping people to see what it looked like and felt like as you got to middle school and high school. And the technology teachers turned out to be some of the big storytellers, and frequently they would know the kids of the people we were taking through. So there was this personal connection with the ASM story and an intersection of the families and the parents' real experience and what the school was doing, and it suddenly came alive for them. So either manufacturing or discovering those moments and figuring out how to do it more consistently became something that I was doing this with the former board chair, something that we became better and better at.
Great. You referenced earlier, going back to your skepticism, certainly from a local perspective, that perhaps there wasn't that culture, there wasn't that expectation, A, that maybe somebody be asked, or B, certainly that they'd be expected to give. Could you talk a little bit about that then, if you fast track to where you are now in the fundraising and how that has translated to success?
Well, culture and environment are what you make them. And a lot of times we can sort of think, oh, this is the environment we're in. But whether you're talking about climate change or whether you're talking about school culture or culture of philanthropy, it is what it is because of all the small acts that have gone together to create it. And so by beginning to have conversations that maybe at first were uncomfortable or painful, even did best to hide that as possible, but by beginning to have those conversations and helping people draw connections and beginning to attack assumptions that people may have had about the school's operating budget or how we spent things or what we were spending on, we started to build up sort of a repertoire of ourselves of key talking points that our biggest investment wasn't in facilities, but it was in people. That this wasn't all about just buildings, but this was about program and finding examples to show how program had as its foundation the facilities themselves. So increasing the experiences that people had with these kinds of ideas started to build a wider culture. Because one thing we know, whether it's WhatsApp chats about grades or teachers or whatever, schools are hotbeds for conversations that are going on the sides. And a lot of times we're the victims and we're on the receiving end of it all. But we can also push to get some of our messaging out there and have the confidence that the repetition isn't going to just be a broken record, but there's some power in repetition. And we have extended some of that now to doing exit interviews with 12th grade parents. At first we thought they would be legacy meetings, and yes, we're referencing legacy, but part of it is just to hear from the people who've been through the experience and let them talk to us about the quality of their experience over time. And so we have been, at first we were focused on the ask, and now we're focused more on cultivation, both of alumni and alumni families, as well as realizing that if we start talking to the incoming families early on, we may not get to the ask in that first conversation, but next year we're going to target invite all the new families in some kind of way to have a beginning conversation to introduce to them the idea, this is the way we do it around here, this is what it's all about, this is why it is. And so that when we do bring them in, either for individual or group conversations, they have a framework that rests on the culture that we want to create, not that what we have at the moment.
Excellent. Just to pursue that whole idea of culture, because of course we hear it all the time, assumptions are made, well, this group of parents will never give to you, or this group over here will think this. If you fast forward to the success you had and think, or if you could give the group a flavor of who has been financially supportive of you and how that is very much across nationalities, across geographies, and I think that'd be helpful for everybody.
This sort of reigning wisdom at the beginning was the Spanish families wouldn't contribute. They have their own foundations. They're involved in other ways. It's not in their cultural mix as far as that goes, and they don't have any tax incentive to do it. And that hasn't proved true at all. I think in general, the families that have the longest connection with the school, one way or the other, are the families that see the greatest benefit to the school's growth over time, who are more susceptible in a positive way to the sort of message that the school is growing and building and developing to serve and do better, and are therefore more likely to give. And some of those happen to be the Spanish families because they are here for longer term, but equally true, it's been a surprising mix about the people who, it may be instances in their own lives where they benefited from philanthropy, or they went to a US college, so they have some experience with it and it makes sense to them. There are a number of people, the other sort of aspect of this is patience, because people may not be in a position to give at the moment that you happen to sit down and talk to them. And being in the middle of COVID, that's a huge factor. So people on paper could have had tons of money in terms of, hotel or properties, but at the height of COVID, they were just bleeding cash rather than bringing it in. And so having the conversation, being understanding to their situations, we were probably less pushy than we could have been in a number of instances, but considering where we were as a society and as a school community during that time, I think that patience and understanding paid off as well.
Great. We're a couple of questions coming through, Ben, and I'm going to take the two of them together. Michael has asked, you used a phrase, bring them in. Could you give a sense of how you're meeting with people, how that ask goes? And then part B of that, how much of your time is spent on fundraising?
Right now, I probably have ideally, I would like to have between 1 and 3 meetings a week. That would be a pretty good pace to keep up. When we first went through the sort of initial, we went through and looked for the high profile people as best we could. We talked with the admissions director. We used our sort of own background. The former board chair was out there literally watching who drove up in fancy cars, and we ought to talk to that one. And then we did, from that, we then, with CCS's help, went through and did sort of an investigation, and now we do that internally, but we went through using social media and some other databases to get a sense of what their net worth, what might be, what kinds of business they were in, and some of it's just background information so you can have a conversation. And some of it would allow us to try to guess as best as possible what might be a reasonable figure to ask them. And our first asks were way over the top and actually left some people feeling cold because we had asked too much. But we kept up the conversation and stayed humble, and they ended up coming around and have been not just single donors with their original pledges, but have given multiple times. So again, that idea of patience, owning up to your mistakes. Now what we do is we look at the new parents coming in and sort of figure that we're going to try to target the highest net worth people for individual conversations one-on-one, which is sort of calculating, but you have to be, otherwise you'd spend way too much time. We figure we're going to try to build connection with people coming in, with the newcomers, and whether that's a group meeting or, because one-on-one is too many for us to do. But have something that builds connection coming in and then builds connection going out, which is the exit interviews, and then target the net worth people, and then have group meetings that we'd set up as well and move to that.
Ben, just about the bringing them in and having those, but you start with some one-to-one conversations, and they are primarily in person. With you alone or with the chair, or what's that combination?
The former board chair, he's still on the board now, but he stepped down as board chair. He and I have been doing this together. He's retired, and it gave him tremendous insight into, we've had 130 plus conversations now at this point. It's a tremendous way to get insight and details about what's going on at the school and where the community is. You're sort of running focus groups. So you may think you're doing fundraising, but you're also engaged in active listening with members of your community and building connections with them, finding out what their concerns are, finding out what talents you have, what expertise you have, and who might be interesting people to connect in different ways. So it's it's sort of action research on the one hand, which could benefit you in all kinds of ways, and then it's the fundraising itself.
Great. And understanding the past chair is still on the board, is he still involved, or is there ever a case where you do meetings by yourself?
I've had some where, for one reason or another, the people coming in wanted it just to be me. I think, that idea that you're going to talk and it may be about money and it's going to be a wider audience than just the head of school. For some people, they'd rather keep it more private. When he rolls off the board, it's highly unlikely there'll be anybody who has remotely near that time. And so now a development director who's more interested in being able to have some of these conversations. And I think the idea would be to have her join us in some of these, and then for her to take either some initial cultivation kinds of conversations and then pass some on to me, but to work as a team that way.
Great. Ben, we're having a lot of questions come through. I'm selfishly going to ask you 2 more, and then I'll hand it over to Laura to take the questions from the group. You talked about being humble, or reminding yourself to be humble. If you had your time back again, what were some of the lessons you learned, and what would you do differently, if anything?
I think you've got to make the mistakes to learn stuff anyways. I mean, so the biggest deal is to learn on the fly, and not let the sort of anxiety about making a mistake hold you back. It's that same idea about going swimming. There's only one way to do it. If I could have come to the realization about storytelling and some of that quicker, that would have been lovely. We're building up the repertoire and building up the story and starting to realize that the story is really many strands rather than a single one. So trying to find the definitive story to tell might have been counterproductive in its sense. I think the biggest thing to cultivate is that you've got to seize on the opportunities to tell your part of the story at the same time as being incredibly open in the moment to what the other people are telling you, and reading those, in some cases, very subtle body language kinds of signals about how they're reacting to what you're saying, how they're responding to what their inclination is in terms of, giving, or, whether they need more time, or whether you're actually going to get to the ask in that meeting, or whether you should just put that paper, away and say, we'll talk to you again in a couple of months. To me, that's a hugely important factor.
Sure. And I'd imagine over the course of the conversation, which is probably 30, 40 minutes, you have to be quite nimble even in that storytelling, understanding there's a core part of the narrative, but depending on their interest, or perhaps even where their child is in the school, may help shape that narrative slightly differently.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're lucky if we can get out in an hour. The exit interviews we can keep to an hour, but some of the others, if you want them to see certain things in the school, it's sort of, if you want the job done right, you got to devote the time to it. And so to have these be rushed or something like that it isn't good. To me, it wouldn't have worked as well. And that could be just a function of myself, but I also, you're dealing with people especially at the high end. They're used to being listened to. They're used to being in charge. They want to get a sense of what they're getting out of all this, and they want to feel proud of the community that they belong to and of what their kid is doing. And they want you to recognize those things. And that just takes time.
Certainly. Ben, as I mentioned, a lot of questions are coming through, obviously prompted by some of your answers. So I'm going to thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand it over to Laura, and she'll start to take some from the group.
Sure.
Thank you, Derval. I think I've tracked everything, and I'm going to be paraphrasing. Sam, is it possible to get everyone's faces back? I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to ask 2 quick questions just to have a sense of the demographics here. By show of hands, who here is in a fundraising role or in the fundraising department? Thank you. And then who is outside of the department? So a head or working in communications or marketing? Great. All right, well, great to see everyone. I was going to have you introduce yourselves in the chat, but we have so many people that I think it could consume it and I could lose questions. So I'm going to ask the questions that were posed, and then as new questions arise, just raise your hand, I'll call on you and you can introduce yourself to the group. There was a question, forgive me, I forget who it was from, about, Ben, this is directed to you. How do you keep the sentiment among the community feeling inclusive while you're speaking to very targeted families?
Well, we've let them know all along that it's not a secret, and that we're going to go public, and we want them, and the dynamic of the campaign is we want to be able to launch the campaign as a success to begin with. So on the 27th of April, we're going to have a donors event. We're going to invite not just a number of people that we've spoken to and are cultivating, as well as people who have actually given money. And we're going to announce that we have a 5 million campaign, and we're almost 3 million of the way there. So and that logic has made sense to people. I'm sure there's some undercurrents and people feeling like I'm not going to go in even if I get invited, because they're just going to ask me for money. And that's fine. At a certain point, you have to believe in what you're doing and go for it, and allow people. You're not going to change people's minds until they have new experiences. You can say all the words you want. And so in some ways, we have to start giving experiences that are going to allow them to feel this as a positive and allow them to experience the difference for their kids now, that are going to make them feel excited, proud, and I'd like to help out some more.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm going to go out of order and intentionally. So Rachel, I know this question came from you about finding the right profile of a development director or a fundraising person. How would you define that ideal person?
That's for me.
Indeed.
Sure. It's got to be somebody, it's more about a set of skills, perhaps, than in someone who's got tons of experience being a fundraiser and some other kinds. So I would look for the person before I look necessarily at the experience. And so it's got to me, it's someone who sees themselves as a team player with a variety of people on the team, cutting across departments. So anyone who has a fixed mindset, it's not going to work for me. It needs to be someone who's very personable, who can listen, who can take initiative, who's extremely organized, who enjoys the accomplishment. I don't quite know whether it's a bit like the chase, the hunt. I mean, you're going after a goal. So someone who's goal oriented in that kind of way and gets satisfaction from that.
Thank you. Rachel, does that leave you feeling a bit more optimistic?
Yes, it does. In terms of, so we're talking, we only have a limited budget for this position right now, or, that's constrained where we are. So I'm looking for the beautiful constraints. My question would be, is this something that someone could come out of college and do if they have the right skill set and the right mindset?
I think if they can run Excel fairly effectively, they've got a pretty keen grasp of how to interact with people and aren't sort of fawning or overawed by people that they might run into. If they're genuine, if they can invest themselves in the story of your school and are articulate, then the rest of the things you're going to pick up along the way together. And I think, as long as you're willing to walk together in that way, I would say probably. I think it'd be useful to make sure that they got some set of experiences so that you could put them in the way of some professional development that was going to allow them to see whether they were going to go. But it's sometimes hard to sell a board to say we want to spend $150,000 to start making money. It's, that can be difficult because you're sort of treading water and you're not getting anywhere in terms of what, the pledges that are coming in. They're just paying for the infrastructure that you're creating. So we had the support of CCS at first, and I think that was certainly made a big difference, and we were lucky that the board approved that. It helped us get over some of the hurdles of thinking whether it would be possible or not. But we don't, at this point, we have a young woman. She's not just out of college, but she's relatively younger. She's worked in some different capacities in a couple of local schools, but she has the personality and she has the initiative. And to me, that makes all the difference in the world.
Thanks, Ben. Ben, I have just a couple directed to you, and then I want to open things up. Clive, I want to ask your question, and then I want to turn it back on you in a few minutes. Clive from ASIJ, and I should share with everyone, I'm an alum of ASIJ and on the Alumni Giving Council there. Thank you, Clive. Clive had asked about the role of the board, Ben, and how did you navigate that conversation about that type of investment and really prioritizing this?
Well, the board had alternated for years saying, and they had used, and I worked at the school in Johannesburg, so I always get those two acronyms mixed up. So different schools have been held out to be beacons of doing it right for us at different times. And so this was a board that alternated between saying, we really should be doing this, to we don't know if it's possible. So finally, the deal was, you got to put up or shut up at a certain point. And that's when, and we had gone to the US ambassador who was here, and he had mentioned CCS. And the price tag for the board was a little daunting at the beginning, but the initial studies showed there was great potential. And so the idea was that we've been saying this for years. We've been talking about that, it's possible, it happens out there in the world, whether we're basing that on truth or not, doesn't matter. But at a certain point, we need to actually take the steps to find out what will happen and take them seriously. Otherwise, we're just chasing a dream and not doing anything about it.
Clive, did you want to elaborate? I know your blog has addressed this as well. We'd love to know how you've had that conversation about the investment.
Well, boy, I don't know if I can add that much more than Ben's already shared. Although, Ben, it sounds like you came into it with a board that was pushing you to do it, as opposed to how, for some people, can you get the board to even consider something like this? You had said a bunch of things before about making mistakes, and I think I've been very fortunate in my career as an advancement director to be at schools that allow children to iterate, make mistakes, and also their employees too. So I've learned a lot along the way. This idea of how can you get a board to start fundraising? Is that what you're asking me, Laura? Do you want to, how do we get a board involved with this?
Yeah, I was just thinking about your recent blog on having that conversation with the board about investing in the role for those who are, I think, having that sticker shock, as you mentioned, Ben, about what it would cost to put into a salary and beyond.
So yeah, quite often I'm asked to speak with boards, heads of school, about how do you get a fundraising program off the ground. And then there is this issue of, well, where do we find the right person and how much is it going to cost us? And I think, Ben answered this the same way I would, is I think as long as you have a consultancy behind you and a board that is behind you and everybody knows the direction that we want to go in, finding the person, you can go for hiring a local person who hopefully has some fundraising experience, perhaps not necessarily in an international school setting, but it is possible to get somebody into that position and get them going. But I want to reiterate that having a board on board for the type of fundraising that you're going to be doing is very important. Quite often you'll have people who are on the board and everybody's well-meaning, but their idea of fundraising is going to a gala event where people are bidding enormous amounts of money on things. And that's for something like childhood leukemia. There's no nuance in that. You're donating money to help something like that. If you're talking about donating money to what looks like on the surface helping privileged kids be more privileged, there's a lot more nuance that goes into that. And so if you have a board that is mixed in its idea about how fundraising should work, and you bring on somebody who is well-meaning also, but is going to take direction from all these different things, I think it's a little bit harder. But once you have the head who knows what they're doing, the board, the direction they want to go in. I mean, you mentioned my blog. One of the first ones I wrote was about my aversion to what I call transactional fundraising. There are reasons to have parties. especially to thank our donors. But if we think we're going to have a gala event with raffles and auction, and that's going to take us anywhere, it hides the case for support, and it becomes very transactional. So, yeah, if I can sum it up, I think that making sure that board knows everybody's on board together, moving in the same direction, getting an advancement director, someone who's on a local contract perhaps, but also having a consultancy that can help you meet these milestones is super important. Can be done.
Thank you, Clive. Ben, I could see you light up with the idea of having a gala. I know they're always so much fun. Michael, I know you have a few questions here, and I want to be sure we hit them. I'm going to take your first one. And again, Ben, this goes to you. In terms of the annual fund, what role does that play with your major gift work?
Well, we haven't had an annual fund yet. So that will be something new that as we announce the campaign publicly, our current thinking is that the annual fund would not replace. We're still looking for pledges. We're still looking for a capital campaign, but it allows us to have some other events or some other kinds of things that could feed into it. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that, because if parents are asked to give in too many different ways, in too many different directions, it's like, hey, I gave at the door. What are you asking for me again for, kind of deal. But that seems to be, and so the idea, I mean, we are going to have 1 or 2 events a year, and they're more to have a spirit of fun, some recognition, some other things. They're not going to move the dial into a great measure in one direction or the other. But it also means if we're careful about how we select it and message it, we're going this direction strategically, but we can go there faster and further with your support now. And so if we keep the capital campaign and the annual campaign pretty closely aligned, then we're not sort of chasing 2 completely different directions. So some will be how we negotiate that and frame it and tell the story of it.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Patricia, I'm ready to pick on you. I know we'd had a conversation about at ASP following the campaign, the role of stewardship of the donors who gave, but then I think you brought up a really great point about the role of the annual fund that really has remained in place for decades now at ASP. Yeah. So I'd love to hear your thinking on that.
Well, I think that, we did have a capital component, as you know very well, Lara. And I think the annual fund, yes, helps build and maintain a culture of giving, even when you're not talking about a capital campaign, because it's just shows every family that philanthropy is part of the school's DNA. It's just something that we do. And that it has helped build the school, because new families will not have seen the capital campaign, right? And what they visit the campus, it's the way it is today. And so they didn't see everything that's gone into the capital campaign. So I think for that, the annual fund is very important. Of course, it helps you identify donors and nurture a culture of philanthropy on campus and with alumni. It does also set best practices, and I think it also allows you to test your message and your story, as Ben mentioned. So for all those reasons, I think the annual fund is important. And I'm a strong believer that thanking donors properly is very important, and the annual fund is important for that too. I mean, every gift is worth celebrating, right? So for that, I think the annual fund is important. And we've had an annual fund or a form of it for a very long time now at ASP. So yes. Does that answer your question, Lara? Yeah.
That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ben, the questions keep coming. And this one is actually for me. I know we talked about it the other day too. When we think about culture, being so pervasive across the school community, I'd love to know how you've approached this conversation with faculty to ensure that they are comfortable and supportive of the work you're doing with fundraising.
So I did a presentation, I've done it twice now, called Financial Literacy 101 with a faculty, just to sort of give them an idea about how the school is structured, where the money comes from, where it goes. And in that, wove in the strand of, you guys know we're asking for money and we're doing it for these reasons. And I made the same set of points with them as, we've invested in you. It's your salaries, it's in reducing student teacher ratio, it's about adding new programs. All these benefit the students, but they also benefit the staff in a number of ways. We've supported initiatives that staff have been interested in doing. One of the reasons we're able to do this, and we'll be able to do it more in the future, is by having fundraising. By involving the example of the technology teachers, we stop in on the rounds with some of these classes and allow those teachers to engage with the parents that we're talking with. And that brings them into telling the story as well. And it's something that they're proud of. It's their craft. It's them being recognized in a way, not singled out. It's easier to do it in the tech classes that are project-based and all that. It's really harder to go into an IB chemistry or physics class. We haven't tried that yet. But it is about generating a sense of, we're doing this because we're proud of what we're doing. We want the community to be aware of the quality of what goes on at the school and to understand it in a deeper way, and to be motivated to support it, not just with the school fees and things like that, but to actually reach a little deeper and allow us to do the things that we know are important and will take us to the next step.
With that, I'd really love to open this up to the group to hear about your own success stories with these groups that are really adjacent to fundraising. So I'm not just thinking of the faculty, but also maybe the communications department, admissions. Obviously, the board's a part of that as well. But I think those three are often circulating around fundraising and can make the job, really fun and successful, but it can be a challenge as well. So any great stories to share from the group? So it looks like we have some troubleshooting to do then. Nowhere to go.
Laura, at the risk of putting someone on the spot, I was going to call on Damon, just more broadly. Damon, you're going to kill me for this, but
not today, but maybe next week.
There you go. Damon has been tremendously successful. He'll be very modest, but tremendously successful while he's been headmaster, but certainly the school itself for, God, must be 50 years or so. Damon, you might just give 2 or 3 tips to everybody about how your success has come about.
And I just Catherine's here with me as well, who assists me with doing this and does most of the donkey work and the research and the setting of things up. And we obviously have meetings with first year parents predominantly, and we're moving into a campaign now with past pupils. And so just for those of you who don't know us, I'm headmaster of Gonzaga College SJ in Dublin. And we had a 20 million euro project, which concluded around 2009, and obviously took until about 2016 to pay that off. And we're now currently embarking on another similar size project. And it was very heartened actually by what Ben said there, because very much of what he has said rings very true. This idea that we're not investing in buildings, we're investing in people, we're investing in programs, we're investing in the future and creating a narrative and story around it. And one of the things that Catherine here always says is that people don't give to projects and they don't give to schools, they give to people. So it's really key, in that sort of 30-35 minutes that we have with a set of parents, you have to create an instant rapport. You've got about 10 minutes to pitch and make somebody have that nice fuzzy feeling, because that's why they will give to us, not because we've got a good business case or not because we've got some nice architectural drawings. We have all of those, but they give because of the relationship and because they see a future and because they see that they're part of a community. And one of the things that we insist on very strongly is the idea that they're enjoying facilities that people have contributed towards in the past. and that they're kind of paying forward. And it's about us looking to see what position the school will be in a decade or two. And I think all of these little things add into it. The experiences and so on that people have in the school. We had a very significant rugby victory at the weekend, and there's a huge buzz around the place. Probably the equivalent for you in the US of having winning a college league or something in American football or baseball. And those kinds of experiences create a positivity around the institution and the organization. And people like to give to things that are successful. They like to give to things that look like they're going places. And I think those are important contributory factors as well. And also, for those of you who are new to it, just creating a culture where there's an expectation of philanthropy. And over more recent years, we have done things like having meetings with incoming parents, flagging the fact that we will be asking them for funds, and it's done as part of our admissions process. So unless you're deaf, blind, and stupid, you're going to be asked for money when you come in here. And so we're setting them up in such a way that there are no shocks. And there are people who don't have capacity. That's fine. That's absolutely perfect that they don't have that. But for the rest, there's an expectation of A, being asked, and B, of giving at whatever level suits them. And I think setting those things up is absolutely key to success, Derval. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Great, thank you, Damon. And I called on you because of the rugby, right? So I'm glad. Thanks, Damon.
I had to slip it in there,
Ben, it looks like there's a question for you that just came in from Michelle. I'll read this. Did you offer translations of fundraising communications in home languages for your largest parent demographics? Or are you meeting with different cultural groups to ensure they're understanding the philanthropic direction of the school?
So we haven't gone public yet. Our former board chair that I've been working with is fluent in Spanish. He's been here 20 plus years, married to a Spaniard. So we've had fundraise, and my Spanish is bad at best. So we've had meetings that are 90% Spanish, and I can, especially because I know where we're going with a conversation, I can follow along and chime in. So we have been able to be accommodating depending on who our audience is and which language they're most comfortable in. We have not translated all our materials. I mean, at this point, with being able to translate just about anything with a click, I think that's not the same issue that it was not that long ago, and will become increasingly less so. It's really helped. One thing I noticed when we did our first meeting, so we speak whichever language the family is comfortable in. And if they're here doing business in Spain, they may be Chinese, they may be Hungarian, but they're going to be doing their business in Spanish. So that's been a sort of fallback, or conversely English. So between the two, we've hit everybody just fine. And it's been really interesting to watch the board chair when he's in Spanish mode. He's a completely different person. He's not the Iowa farm boy anymore. He's suddenly more animated. His hands are moving. He's more gestures. It's more emotional. He gets closer to people. It was a really interesting transformation. So that being some flexibility in recognizing who you're talking with and where they're from, and making them feel comfortable with the conversation, and making it be a very personal one is important.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Patricia, I'm going to call on you again. I know at ASP, we'd had a telethon for the annual fund, and parents would volunteer, and they would get other families from their nationalities so they could call them and speak to them in their native language about, again, that was just giving on an annual basis. Has that continued or come back? And what have you experienced?
Unfortunately, not recently. I think it's a great idea. I think it does make sense, although more and more of the families, English is one of the very common language, but we are aware of the cultural differences, right? And in very international schools, so it's something to keep in mind. But recently we haven't had that. We're not doing telethons at the moment, and I think a lot is going through WhatsApp. But yes, I mean, I think we have parents ambassadors for the different nationalities though, and have had for years. So I think that's important to for our parents.
That's great. Yeah, as long as it's not in the parent class chat groups, that's not where you want to be discussed.
Yeah, WhatsApp groups can be dangerous.
Agreed. Clive, I see your hand up.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted there was something that stuck out to me that both Ben and Damon sort of highlighted. Damon, you were talking about the fact that by the time families get into your school, they either have to be deaf and blind to not know that fundraising is a part of the school. And Ben, you had mentioned, I think it was you talking about the finances 101, that each year you talk to the faculty and staff, give them a primer on how these schools work. And to me, this is something that I call, it's a fundraising school. You have to be a fundraising school, not simply a school that fundraises. You know, if somebody comes in and says, I want to donate money to the school, and there's somebody who's in a broom closet over there and they take care of it, it's never going to work properly. It needs to be something that really is a part of the school and everybody understands that they have a role in helping it to work. And I just noticed that both of you guys had really articulated that is, you have fundraising schools and not simply schools that happen to have fundraising as a department over there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if it's cultural, then that's the definition of culture. A, it's everyone, and B, it's integrated into all the ways that we do things, the way we think, the way we act, the way we interact with one another, the whole bit. And so the definition of culture means exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, you often hear people who say, oh, that wouldn't work at our school because we're not American, basically, as if Americans come out of the womb predisposed to give their money away. It really is a question of education. People are entering a culture, they look around them and they see that the board gives meaningfully, that everybody understands what it's for, what the case for support is, and they will pick up on that.
Michael, I so appreciate the questions you put into the chat, and I know we haven't gotten to all of them. I feel like there's definitely going to be a continued conversation about alumni is a whole other topic, and the board, and maybe just quickly though, Ben, I know there was a question for Michael on timing. So you mentioned going more public about the campaign. How long has it taken you to get to that 3 million mark where you are today?
We started in, I'm going to get my years mixed up. It's a little over 2 years now. And so it'll be almost 2.5 years from when we first started meeting with parents to when we announced it publicly. A lot of it was slow at the beginning. This year, we sort of been cleaning up the caseload. So as all the people who never responded to us or never came in from meetings, we've been trying to get in touch with them and push those meetings along. So there's sort of periods of greater activity. We probably could have been more efficient at it in terms of moving it along faster. But I think going at it slowly and paying attention to people along the way will allow us to have a broader base, and as well as a base of people who felt like, oh, they got in touch with me, I didn't show up at those meetings, and now when we go public, we can start to move with them again.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and thank you, Sam. And Catherine, I know you're interested in the alumni conversation too, but probably for another day. Derval, I will pass it to you to wrap up. And Ben, again, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Ben, we might be inclined to ask you back again, especially for all these extra questions.
You've got my number.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to reiterate Lara's gratitude. We truly appreciate you coming on board, and indeed everybody here today. We hope you found it valuable. Just as regards next steps, you may have noticed that we're recording this, and it was remiss of me not to say that at the outset, so my apologies, but we're recording it and we'll send it on to all of you so that you have it. Certainly there were a lot of very helpful tips and advice in there that I'm sure you can play back in your own time. We're also going to send you a quick survey just in case there are other topics of interest to you. And certainly, Laura, we have track of all the questions asked in the chat. So we'll come back to you on some of those too in the short term and certainly give you our answers to those, maybe before we have you back again, Ben.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you very much. As I say, we hope you found it helpful. And if you have any questions about today's roundtable or just more broadly around fundraising or indeed CCS, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you all very much, and we hope you have a good rest of the day. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Darrell. Thank you.